Welcome to the Foster. I'm Anne Baxter, and I'm sitting in front of a mural of Tony painting in the rainforest in Mulu National Forest in the Malaysia part of Borneo. And with me, almost in real life, is Tony in Cornwall, England. So thank you for your time and willingness to talk about your experiences in painting in Borneo. Let's just talk about Borneo. I know it's the third largest island in the world. It's large as the state of Texas or 3 times the size of the United Kingdom.
It borders the South China Sea, and it's it's part of Malaysia, and it's near Singapore, if that helps people. And in order to get there, I flew to Singapore and then on to Kuala Lumpur, and from Kuala Lumpur to Miri, and then from Miri caught a little Cessna. Had to hire the Cessna actually in order to get to Mulu, which is a World Heritage protected rainforest in the Sarawak region of Borneo.
Yes, I guess it's divided. The one island's divided into 3 territories: Indonesia, Brunei, and Malaysia. But you were always in the Malaysian area.
Correct. Yes, that's right. Yes.
So thankfully, it is protected as a national park and as a World Heritage Site. 2 of your luminaries recommended that you travel to Borneo to paint. For Mulu Caves was Robin Hanbury Tennyson, an explorer and well-known founder of the human rights organization Survival International, that campaigns and advocates for the rights of indigenous, tribal, and uncontacted peoples around the world. I know you've had a long friendship with him, and could you describe how you reached out to Robin to be your luminary and what evolved?
Well, once I decided on this project about exploring beauty, and realized that the way to progress that was to ask people who spent long periods of time in wild places what's the most beautiful place they'd ever seen, and ask them to write about it. So they had to be thoughtful people. Robin was an obvious choice for me, because I was asking explorers, mountaineers, geologists, botanists, biologists, David Attenborough, people like that who spent a long time, and Robin has spent enormous amounts of his life in some of the wildest places in the world, and to him, Mulu rainforest was the most beautiful place he'd ever seen, and so if that was good enough for him, then it was good enough for me. Well, in fact, I mean, it's thanks to Robin that Mulu is preserved as a rainforest, because he went there in the 1970s to establish a scientific research station, and he had facilities built next to the river, and invited scientists from all over the world to come, not all at once, of course, but something like 200 scientists in the end worked there for long periods of time. And so it is, in fact, the most studied piece of rainforest in the entire world. They know absolutely everything about every single aspect of it. And so the Borneo government, at the end of all this, research, had really very little choice except to accept that this was going to have to be, I don't know how many 100,000 square acres it is, but it's a lot. It was going to have to be preserved because otherwise there would have been an outcry throughout the world from the world's scientists. It is carefully looked after, preserved. The scientific research station is still very important. And that's in fact where I stayed when I went to do my paintings. It is a beautiful place, and without the protection it happens to have, it would be destroyed like many other beautiful places have been.
Yes. So you were inspired to visit Mulu Caves in Borneo and paint 2 intricate, wonderfully detailed paintings that we have here at the Foster. One is the stream from Clearwater Cave, Mulu. That's about 2 feet square. You painted that over about 5 days. You note in your inscription, I had forgotten how long rainforest paintings take. All that detail, all that veg. And then the larger artwork from Mulu Caves, which is about 4 feet square, is titled Looking Out from Deer Cave, Mulu, 6 days. You spent a day scouting for this site.
We were, scrambling over piles of bat guano and sliding down these horrible horrible the hills of the stuff, with pitch black. I mean, it was just awful. The stink was terrible, and it was full of creepy crawlies that you looked absolutely awful. But we came out the other side through a little tiny. You crawl out through a little tiny hole the other side, and it's almost like bursting into the Garden of Eden. I mean, it's just the most beautiful, untouched. You have a sense that you're the first person ever to go there. And it's just ecstatic after, being in the cave itself for an hour and a half or something, and threading your way through and past all these horrible things. And there was a river the other side which was utterly clear, completely gin clear, with plants growing in it. And I took all my clothes off and jumped and sat in the river and to wash away the memory of all this back guano. And it was enormous fish living in there, and not at all fazed by me sitting there. I mean, it's just because they'd never been hunted, I suppose, and never been attacked. They'd just been left alone. So you have this sense that nobody's ever been there before. And that was magic.
This large painting is painted just inside the cave, so that protected you from the downpours that you experience every hour.
Well, I mean, it just rains for 20 minutes every hour, thundering, tremendous crashing rain comes bashing through the rainforest. In some ways, it was easier working in the cave than working on paintings in the open forest. In some ways, it was worse, so because the smell of the back guano was just overwhelming, really. There are 3 million wrinkle-lipped bats live in the cave. They're marvelous things in that they, at dusk, they all swarm out of the mouth of the cave and make those beautiful sinuous movements that you see sometimes birds doing. Those beautiful things, and they make these wonderful, wonderful shapes in the sky, and then finally find their direction and off they go. And it's a beautiful thing to see. And they eat 20 tons of insects a night. Now, 20 tons of insects, I can't imagine what that is. I mean, is that a train load? I mean, what is it? What's it look like? But of course, they crap about 10 tons of guano a night. So the smell is just overwhelmingly horrible. And so to sit in there painting was pretty hard going, really.
Your detailed artworks show your keen power of observation and ability to describe your sense of place, of being there, which I believe you capture in your artworks beautifully. And part of that is the inscriptions, your notes from diary notes from being there. And also your souvenirs. They always have a special story or relate to the experience and a reason for being part of the artwork. And none more so than this painting, looking out from Deer Cave, Mulu. And I wonder if you could talk about the special souvenirs that are part of this painting.
Well, they do mean a lot to me, those, because Robin, when he was building his research station, struck up an extraordinary friendship with a hunter-gatherer called Nyapun, and so before I left for Borneo, he came to have lunch with me, and he gave me £100 and asked me if I would transfer it to local currency, and then go into the forest and see if I could find Nyapun if he was still alive, and give him £100 in local currency, because he thought that Nyapun might need medical help, or he might, be struggling in some way, and therefore this would be useful and helpful to him. So, and he also gave me 2 beautiful photographic books of tribal people that he'd taken in all his travels around living with tribal people all over the world. And he wanted me to give those to Nyapun too. So I asked around, and sure enough, a couple of the people actually at the research station, a couple of the Penan people said, "Oh yeah, we know where Nyapun lives, so we'll take it to show him." We went and found Nyapun, found his house, which was a little wooden house on stilts by the river. So we hiked up river to find him, and we went up this sort of tree trunk that you have to climb up in order to get into the house. And there was Nyapun, who knew I was coming. Word had got round that I was looking for him. And he was sitting in the corner with his two wives and 3 tiny, very, very thin, tiny people sitting together, him flanked a wife on each side. And at first, I guess he was quite wary, not knowing what I was there for, or who I was. But once he knew that I was a friend of Robin's, then he became much more open, and we had a long conversation all afternoon. And so as part of it, I got these books out, and I was going through the books and finding, or between us, we were finding pictures of him in the forest with his blowpipe 45 years previously. A very vigorous, strong, not an ounce of fat on him. I mean, just wearing only a loincloth, and photographs of him with his bow and arrow, photographs of him doing all sorts of interesting things. And then at one point there was a photograph of him with a little girl, his daughter, and his family were also there because they were waiting for me, because they knew that somebody was coming to see Nyapun, so they wanted to see what was going on. So his family were there, and this woman, this 40-year-old or 45-year-old woman, said, "Oh, that's me." And sure enough, you looked at her, and it was her. I mean, this little tiny, beautiful little girl. The other book was gifts that Robin had been given by tribal people. So we went through those, and Nyapun said, "Oh yes, I gave Robin that bow and arrow, and I gave Robin that quiver, and I gave Robin that piece of hemp rope, or that all sorts of things that Robin had been given by Nyapun, necklaces too." And at one point there was this loincloth which had been made out of tree bark. His wives had chewed this tree bark to make it soft, and it was Nyapun's loincloth. And there it was. And I said to Nyapun, "Well, Nyapun, you're a very famous man in England, really, because your loincloth is now in a glass case in a museum." And the idea that his underpants were in this glass case in a museum, the whole family were rocking with laughter. It was just the most magic moment. And anyway, so we had a wonderful afternoon, and at the end of it, Nyapun staggered to his feet, and he put his arms around me, and he rubbed his face on my face, and then he took this necklace from around his neck and he hung it around my neck, and he said, "Now we are brothers." And so when I was in the forest after that, when people would go past, they would see that I had this necklace, and they knew that I'd become a friend of Nyapun's, or his brother, in fact. And so they'd show me things. They'd say, "Hey, Tony, come and see this." They'd show me things I hadn't noticed at all. Fantastic, insects 6 inches long, or some snake that I hadn't noticed, or some bird's nest, or some wonderful, wonderful thing. And it made an enormous difference to me. And his wives too stood up, and they each gave me a necklace, and they said, that "Those are for your wives. Take those for your wives." And so Anne had to sacrifice one of her necklaces for this, and I bought another one too to go with it. And so those really are the souvenirs of that marvelous encounter.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And I noticed you've worn that gift from Nyapun ever since to maintain your brotherhood.
I'm very proud of it. In fact, when I got back to, I had the good fortune to stay in a very fancy hotel in Miri when I got back from the rainforest, and I walked up to reception, dirty looking, having come out of the rainforest, hadn't washed properly, or had been washed with rain, but then ragged, looking thoroughly beaten down, no doubt. And the receptionist immediately beamed with a great smile and said, "That's a Penan necklace. Where did you get that from?" And she knew immediately what it was. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And she said, "Well, you're very lucky."
Yes.
And I think I am.
Well, thank you for your time, Tony, and for sharing your unique talents as an artist and storyteller to celebrate our natural world.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.